Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
One headline for today's Cut the Clutter could be diplomacy has broken out between the big powers. Big powers that also happen to be rivals. That's America and China. That is because Anthony Blinken, the American Secretary of State, and Yang Jiechi, the Chinese top diplomat like their national security advisor, state counselor, they have met in Zurich now in Switzerland. This follows on to a meeting that they held in Anchorage, Alaska shortly after the Biden presidency began. That meeting, as we know, was quite fraught. That did not go very well. Both sides pretty much ended up cursing each other. The Chinese a bit more than the Americans, but it was known to everybody that that meeting was frosty. It wasn't a good meeting. This meeting, it seems, was a friendlier meeting. At least this did not have any exchange of angry words or any leaks afterwards that indicated that the situation was very bad. So your follow-up question to my suggestion of this headline could be that if diplomacy is broken out, why are we getting so exercised about it? It's not as if a war is broken out, right? And it's not as if a war is about to break out. Now, underlying this and underlying this feverish diplomatic activity on both sides, that the American side, the Chinese side, and you can say the American bloc and the Chinese bloc, such as it is, but essentially China right now. One reason is that the issues vis-a-vis Taiwan have come to a head now. Now, Taiwanese have done nothing particularly new lately to cause the Chinese, the big mighty Chinese, any offense, nor have the Americans under Biden done anything particularly new to provoke the Chinese. But the Chinese know that on one issue in which they can provoke the Americans, they can draw the attention of the Americans, is Taiwan. Now, Taiwan, we had once, in fact, had an entire episode of Cut the Clutter on Taiwan and how it came into being, its leadership, its politics, how it became a first-class democracy from being a dictatorship, etc. So, Taiwan is like an American protectorate, right? It is an independent entity. Nobody calls it a country. Only a couple of countries in the world do. Even the Americans don't call it a country. Americans also, officially, Americans, Japan, Australia, India, the members of the Quad, most importantly, are all committed to the one China principle. So nobody calls Taiwan a country. At the same time, Taiwan is an entity to which the Americans and the American bloc is committed for its protection, its autonomy, maintaining its not sovereignty, but maintaining its independence in a way, independence of Chinese control. Now, this is a very complex situation. Taiwan is a very small entity. Taiwan is just less than 2.5 crore people. Look at China, that is 1.4 billion. Taiwan is a little island. So Taiwan on a little island has about as many people as Australia in an entire continent has, right? But it is next to China, and between Taiwan and China lies the Taiwan Strait, and that's where tamasha keeps happening all the time. So recently, last week in fact, we've seen stories of Chinese aircraft buzzing Taiwanese air defenses. What the Chinese usually do is, Taiwan has set up an area which is sort of the midway point across the midway of Taiwan Straits called ADIZ, that is Air Defense Identification Zone. Now, ADIZ does not have any sanctity under international law. You cannot go and shoot down and challenge another country's aircraft in an area that you have defined as ADIZ. This is not your territory. This is not your airspace. But the Taiwanese say that up to this place, we will monitor every aircraft that comes in, we will identify every aircraft, and we will be there because we can't take chances. We are a small country, we are very close to China, we can't take chances. So every now and then, the Chinese send these aircraft buzzing Taiwan in this ADIZ, and that wakes up Taiwan's air defenses. They also often scramble their fighters. In fact, last year, Taiwan's cost on just scrambling these fighters was $750 million or almost $750 million. So it's very expensive for a small country like Taiwan. Also, it tires out their pilots, it tires out its small air force. It also increases pressure on its engine use, engine time, etc. for its aircraft. So this is the game the Chinese keep on playing. So last year, for example, 2020, the Chinese had about 350 such intrusions of ADIZ, not Taiwan's own airspace, but ADIZ. This year, these intrusions have already gone up to 650 plus. And of that, 152 came up in the first week of October, the week that is now ending. And that is why this excitement. Because the first week of October, as you can imagine, coincided with the anniversary of the formation of the People's Republic of China. This was the 72nd anniversary. And the Chinese PLA or Chinese PLA Air Force gave Taiwanese a full display of their air power, a bit like you might have on any country's national day, as we have on our Republic Day. We have a whole bunch of aircraft carrying out a fly past. So this was like a fly past while Communist China celebrated its 72nd anniversary of founding. This was a fly past carried out for the quote unquote benefit of the Taiwanese. So this fly past, so-called fly past, I am trying to be funny, had 38 aircraft on day 1, 39 aircraft on day 2, 16 aircraft on day 3, maybe because it was Sunday they decided to take it a little bit easy, 56 aircraft on day 4, and then after that 1 solitary aircraft, right? Yahan ke hame Rajkumar, that is just a show of force. So as this happened, Taiwan also scrambled its own fighters. Its own fighters also let the Chinese know that they were there. And from all that I read in international media, it looks like Chinese pilots also hurled invectives on their radio communication on Taiwanese pilots. I am not sure Taiwanese pilots would have also stayed quiet at what happened, but this is really like going back to the First World War days, where pilots could, with open canopies, could probably even shout at each other, right? So that is the kind of tamasha that went on. 151 or 152 aircraft, depending on whether you count that solitary one in this or not, buzzed Taiwan over a period of 4.5 days. That made the world wake up, because this is almost a half of all the intrusions last year, which means the Chinese were really upping the pressure. So what were the Chinese doing? They were trying to impress the Taiwanese. The Taiwanese already are impressed with the Chinese. The Chinese were sending a message to the Americans that, look, don't take things for granted. Don't think that everything will remain as it is. Don't think that status quo is there and you can live with it forever. We are serving you a warning that this can get worse. So come and talk with us. And that's how these talks also happened. And if you see the readout of those talks, and I will share with you both the readouts, the American readout and the Chinese readout on my screen, please read that. You can see that these readouts are a lot more conciliatory than the earlier one at Anchorage. Also, these readouts tell us that both sides have also agreed that their leaders, that is Xi Jinping on the Chinese side and Joe Biden on the American side, they will be meeting sometime later this year. The date is yet to be fixed, probably for a virtual summit. So that is progress. So maybe what the Chinese wanted was a summit, maybe what Biden wanted was a summit, because again, from what I read in international media, it looks like the American officials, the American side was very dissatisfied with the quality of conversation they've been having with the Chinese officials. So they'd rather prefer if their principal leaders talked directly with each other. So that is the reason I would say the Chinese have done various things to provoke the Americans into making this meeting possible. And next steps are not going to be war. Next steps are going to be talk. But at the same time, Taiwan is an issue that's now become much more of a clear and present issue. Why? Because in Taiwan, the leader there, Tsai Ing-wen, she's got re-elected. She was elected in 2016. She's got re-elected. She's very popular. She's very popular. She's taken Taiwan much more toward in the direction of being a robust democracy. So I will share with you a clip from Fareed Zakaria, one of his videos. I will share the link so you can watch it, in which he points out how all over the world, while democracy is declining, it's Taiwan which stands out as an exception. And there is some stunning data about Taiwan that he is marshaled, and I've checked a lot of it out now also. And I've also read an article that Tsai Ing-wen has written recently for Foreign Affairs, of which I am also sharing a link with you, where she talks about the same fact that look, my country is a case of Pakka democracy, and if for some reason Chinese Communist Party is able to take control of it or to destroy the Taiwanese system, then that will be a defeat for democracies across the world and a victory for authoritarian systems. Now look at the quality of Taiwanese democracy. This year, Economist magazine for 2020 has ranked Taiwan 11th in the world. That means between 2019 and 2020, Taiwan jumped 20 positions up, right, from 31 to 11. The reason this has happened also is that one, there was a fresh election with a large voting percentage, 75% peaceful election, and also, as Farid points out, the leader who lost that election immediately and politely conceded, saying, thank you, good election, thank you very much people voting for me, I lost, now you come and rule the country, my country needs to be united. That is most unlike what happened in America. So I think compared to American democracy over this Trump campaign, any democracy looks not so bad, but Taiwan has done very well. So 11th also puts Taiwan the highest in Asia. It's the highest in Asia, ahead of Japan, India, everybody. That is not something that the Chinese like, that the communist Chinese like, because it then becomes a competing system. Now you can't even say, thing that is said all the time by many people also who are apologists for China in India, also those who have nostalgia for a more authoritarian system. That one reason India has so much problem is because we are a democracy, messy democracy. If only we were an authoritarian system like China. The fact is that little Taiwan, 2.5 crore population or a bit less, Taiwan has a per capita income. You might say, oh, look at the Chinese. They have dictatorship and they have per capita income almost 5 times as high as India's. In fact, a little more than 5 times as high as India's at this point. But the Taiwanese, their per capita income is more than thrice as high as that of the Chinese. So they are richer than the Chinese, they are more educated than the Chinese, they are more westernized than the Chinese, they are enormously more democratic than the Chinese. So it's a question of two competing systems, and that is why they are such an eyesore for Communist Party of China, because they worry that they are constantly being seen by Chinese people in comparison or in competition with the Taiwanese, because they say it's the same people, so see what's happening. Now there was an effort, it's a complicated history. In 1949, we know the civil war in China took place. One side, the Nationalist Party, which was earlier ruling China, they were defeated by the communists, so they went away to Taiwan. They set up what they called as Republic of China there. This became the People's Republic of China. Both claimed to be the real China and laid claims to the rest of China. So PRC over ROC, that is Taiwan, and ROC, that is Taiwan over PRC. But that situation thawed a bit from 1990 onward. In fact, till 1991, China and Taiwan were still living in a state of war. So it's 1991 that the Taiwanese leader at that point also reached out to China, and so did the Chinese leader, and they decided to improve their relations. So 1991, the state of war was withdrawn. Then the next leader who got elected in Taiwan was Chen Shui-bian. Now Chen Shui-bian also continued on improving relations with China. He didn't say anything hostile about China, and now Taiwanese were allowed to invest in China, although the two entities, that is China, PRC, People's Republic of China, and Taiwan, could not talk government to government because one didn't recognize the other. But Taiwanese investments were welcome in China. China welcomes investment from anybody. It was in this process that at some point the Chinese also offered Taiwan the same option that they said they had given to Hong Kong, which is one country, two systems. That look, we can again become one country, this can be reunification, and you have a system of your own, democracy, etc. You can carry on with this. And those talks reached somewhere and looked like there was some juice in that idea, but that juice has now been squeezed out after what the Chinese have done in Hong Kong, because if the original one country, two systems has collapsed, who's going to take any future promises of one country, two systems seriously now? That story is now over, and that's the reason Taiwan now looks so worried and so concerned. That's the reason Taiwan's friends are so worried and so concerned. So as this tension built up and Taiwan sent up its planes to, if not challenge, at least stay abreast with the Chinese PLA planes, you saw the usual saber rattling by Global Times, Chinese spokesperson, etc. Global Times, which doesn't always say nice things about India, as we know. They said this is a warning right now for Taiwanese secessionists and their fomenters. And the warning is that war is real, right? War is real, and Taiwan is now causing us great provocation by describing our planes as enemy aircraft. How dare they describe? I mean, these are my words. They said, how do the Taiwanese describe them as enemy aircraft? They also go on to say, Global Times, that there is strategic collusion between US, Japan and Taiwan, which has now become more audacious. And the more audacious and situation across Taiwan Strait, Global Times said, leaves no room for maneuver. It's teetering on the edge of a face-off. These are exact quotes. Teetering on the edge of a face-off, creating a sense of urgency that war may be triggered any time. Mainstream public opinion in China, that is mainland China, now is to prepare for combat. So this is once again one of those saber-rattling warnings from Global Times, etc., to tell the Taiwanese, to tell the guardians of the Taiwanese as they see them, the Americans, that humse bhi baat kar lo, otherwise lie ho sakti hai. Nobody quite believes that a war will break out so soon, but people are beginning to get worried. For example, the Taiwanese defense minister, Chin Kuo-cheng, he gave an interview to China Times, which is a paper in Taiwan, in which he said that this is the most dangerous situation in 40 years. We haven't seen such a dangerous situation in 40 years. And he said that a war is not imminent today, but a war is very possible by 2025. And in this interview, he says that, look, the Chinese are now creating such a big military strength that they've already minimized their costs of invading Taiwan in terms of attrition. But by 2025, another 3 years, or 4 years, they would have reached a level where they would think the costs to them are minimal. And they might then think about a military adventure, because after all, if Xi Jinping wants to go down in history as the greatest Chinese since Mao, or maybe even greater than Mao, then the first thing he must do is to reunite Taiwan with the mainland. Now, all this has caused this diplomatic activity. So Tony Abbott, the former Prime Minister of Australia, he's been in Taiwan. In fact, on his visit, he described Taiwan as a country. That is something that the Taiwanese took notice of, and that is something that obviously the Chinese took notice of, because Australia does not call Taiwan a country, and Tony Abbott is very close to the current establishment in Australia. He's not even a former Prime Minister who's now in the opposition. He is with the establishment right now. Australians have also issued warnings to China about these air intrusions. The Japanese have issued warnings to China. Even at this meeting in Zurich, the American sources very clearly told their correspondents that Blinken had been quite forthright on the Taiwan issue with the Chinese. So this hectic activity is going on. In the middle of all this, Tsai Ing-wen has written this very perceptive and very important article in Foreign Affairs. I would recommend to you that you read this article in full, but I will just read a few lines from it, which are, to me, the nub of the article, the nub of her argument. She says, all countries now increasingly recognize the threat that Chinese Communist Party poses. See, both of them, they don't call themselves each other Taiwan or China. One addresses the other as Chinese Communist Party, and the other addresses the Taiwanese system, also by way of the political party that Tsai Ing-wen comes from, and that now rules Taiwan, which is DPP, or Democratic Progressive Party. So she says, quote, as countries increasingly recognize the threat the CCP poses, Chinese Communist Party poses, they should understand the value of working with Taiwan. If Taiwan were to fall, she writes, the consequences will be catastrophic for the region and for the world, because the whole world will then be convinced, will come to the conclusion that authoritarianism is superior to democracy. So this is a campaign to defend democracy and democratic values. And then she goes on to say, look, Taiwan, as far as Taiwan is concerned, will neither be pressured by the Chinese, nor would we be adventurous. In the same article, she also mentions that her government is building asymmetric military deterrents. That's very significant. And there she talks about anti-ship cruise missiles, and she also talks about, as part of her asymmetric capabilities, an all-out defense mobilization agency, that is AODMA. What that would do is, that will get civilians, military, everybody involved. So in case there is a provocation, then behind the regular military, a large cadre of trained civilians is also available. At the same time, the Taiwanese have also revealed or announced that they have launched another medium-range surface-to-surface missile, but long enough to reach the mainland, that is Yunfeng, which means cloud peak. It's a surface-to-surface missile. So once again, Taiwanese are also ratcheting it up by saying that, look, we've got deterrence. It's not as if we'll just roll over. This is going to be a messy business, and nobody wants that mess. Although, if you read the Chinese spokespersons or if you read the Chinese official media, you might get the contrary impression, as if China is now preparing for war. So I will just conclude with a statement from Hua Chunying, who also we know well. She is a Chinese spokesperson, who says, Taiwan independence leads nowhere. China will take all necessary measures to resolutely crush all attempts at Taiwan independence. So this tutu meme right now is going on. In the middle of all this very heavy diplomatic activity has broken out, peaked by this meeting between Blinken and Yang Jiechi.